Breaking Dawn. =RK equals. Part 7. Training Area. Royal Palace. Sundari. Mandalore. Are you sure about this? Obi-Wan asked. I put on my helmet and it sealed with a quiet hiss, hiding my smile. I stood still for a few seconds until the armor systems came fully online, environment controls, shields, targeting assist, built-in weapons. More than anything, I muttered and started running a check on my weapons. A pair of heavy blasters, my dart launcher, grenades, 2 vibro knives in my boots and of course my lightsabers. There's going to be a hell to pay. You know that, right? The Jedi sighed. There always is. At least this time the prize is a worthy one. What about Master T and you? Or did you just pull my chain? Kenobi tried again. Nope. We did sleep together and the sex was great. Still, that was all, just sex at a moment we both needed to vent. Under different circumstances. I shrugged. Every time I think about T, I can't help but compare her with Ashara. As if I'm replacing my dead wife with someone who no matter their worth in the end won't be able to compare. That's messed up. Obi-Wan shook his head. If someone told you that the whole emotion thing is simple and without complications, you need to kick their ass. Then why have you been nagging me not to clamp on mine? Because no matter the pain and heartache emotions can bring, they're worth it in the end, Obi-Wan. Look me in the eyes and tell me that you regret that you slept with Satine. That you don't want her again. That's not the point. Kenobi spluttered. It's not. Man, you've got it bad. I smirked. When we're done here, go drag your Duchess to the bedroom and make sure that she won't be thinking about anyone else ever again. Vale. That's totally inappropriate. Obi-Wan glared at me. Getting laid is a very appropriate thing to do. I tuned out his spluttering and looked over the training room. It was 200 meters long, 100 wide and 25 tall. There were various metal panels that could pop up to provide cover as well as hollow emitters to help simulate most environments too. The training ground was configured like a labyrinth with a lot of cover and a decently large open space in the center. Enough with the distractions. What in the name of the Force made you choose that symbol for your clan? Kenobi growled. Hey, it was too easy to get under his skin. I chuckled and glanced down at my chest plate. It was painted black, with a white emblem of the Sith Empire above my heart. I'm sticking it to a certain Sith. Now go in the observation lounge. I promise, the show will be worth it. That's what I'm afraid of. To try not to kill each other. Obi-Wan sighed. It's a terrible idea. He trailed off and shook his head. It's all a matter of perspective. When all is said and done, I'm the last remaining official of the Sith Empire. It was never officially dissolved. If anyone has a right over this emblem, that's me. I've fought and bled for it for decades, Obi-Wan. With those parting words I stepped into the makeshift arena and an armored door closed behind me. I took a deep breath, reveling in the cool air provided by my armor and drew in the Force. A pleasant chill ran over my skin as I submerged myself in the dark side. My senses expanded and I could feel Bo on the other side of the training ground. She took a step forward and her presence all but vanished, leaving me with only a vague idea where she was. If we were actually on a crowded battlefield, she would be practically invisible to my Force senses. I laughed. It's been years since I faced a Mandalorian whose armor was concealed by alchemy. So she did have a relic from the good old days. This was going to be fun. I enhanced myself with the Force and ran forward. I leapt over the nearest obstacle and landed on a 5 meters tall metal pillar. That gave me a good view, only the far end was mostly obscured by a jagged line of platforms. 2 micro-missiles popped up behind a column to my left, then streaked straight at me. My left hand snapped up and I blasted them out of the air with a lightning strike. In the same moment, I drew my lightsaber. 4 more missiles vaulted over the column, followed by Bo, who flew on a jet of fire. I threw away the ordnance with a wide telekinetic push, which caught the Mandalorian just as she halted her ascent. She left the Force wave push her back and opened fire with her blasters, before leveling her flight and darting straight at me. I activated my saber and started deflecting the shots, then sent a lightning bolt at her. To my surprise, Bo kept on coming. My attack harmlessly slid over her armor, which now had a corona of dark side energy dancing all over it. I whistled with appreciation. That was a damn nice kit, that resembled my old armor in capabilities. Instead of facing Bo head-on, I let myself fall behind the column I was standing on. While I was descending, I slashed it through the middle and used the force to tear it in two. As I landed, I sent the piece of durasteel hurling at Bo, who dodged in the last moment and retaliated with a heavy missile mounted on the top of her jetpack. I caught the weapon with my mind and threw it at the oncoming warrior, who banked to the right. I crushed the missile just as she was dodging it. The warhead blew up and threw Bo off course. While she managed to correct her flight and avoided slamming into a 2-meter-tall pillar, she missed me by a large margin. Her shoulder brushed the column and that let her armor discharge the Sith lighting that had been dancing all over her for the last few seconds. Using the force, I called one of my blasters in my waiting free hand and opened fire on Bo. She flew up and returned the favor, before diving towards me. I hit her twice only for my shots to deflect from a shield. At the same time, I intercepted her fire with my blade, sending it to pockmark the nearby pillars. Bo suddenly twisted her body, so her legs pointed at me and used her jetpack to slow down her approach just as I jumped forward and let my blaster go. She laughed and activated a flamethrower built around her left arm, hosing the rapidly shrinking distance between us with liquid fire. My own laughter boomed in response and I drove right through the flames, which covered my armor and started burning through the upper ablative layer. When I emerged from the fire, I found myself staring at a grenade flying my way. Acting on instinct, I shoved the explosive away with the force. Unfortunately, it chose that moment to blow up and threw me back into a nearby pillar. Bo received a similar treatment and slammed into a tall column, before rolling over it. I fell to the ground and used the force to tear the burning substance from my armor, which left it covered with moderately deep rents. A moment later, I threw 2 frag grenades behind the pillar where Bo disappeared. She rolled around its corner an instant before they blew up and sprinted my way. I jumped to my feet and sent a pair of stun darts at her. Perhaps she sensed my attack, perhaps she planned it all along, but just as I shot at her, Bo jumped forward and flew at me with her jetpack. One dart missed and the other simply glanced off her shoulder to no effect. I tried to push her away with the force, using a decidedly non-lethal telekinetic push. That only staggered her and a moment later, Bo shoulder tackled me, driving the air out of my lungs. We crashed in the ground with deafening clanging of armor on durasteel and the force of the impact threw us off each other. It also made me drop my lightsaber. I rolled and surged to my knees, activating the vibro blades built in my arm guards. A moment later, I had gathered the force around me as a shield and charged Bo, who was just finding her footing. She managed to deflect my right arm with her hand and my blade merely grazed her helmet. Bo activated her own built-in vibro blade and tried to gut me, but I blocked her hand with my forearm. She twisted in an incredible way, demonstrating an almost impossible flexibility and slammed a foot in my chest, pushing me back. Then she tried to open the distance even more with her jetpack, but just as the Mandalorian started to fly away, I caught her pack with the force. Bo cursed and hit the release and landed on her feet. I crushed the jetpack and threw it away, while Bo opened fire with wrist-mounted blasters. My shields absorbed the first salvo and popped, but that gave me enough time to summon my saber and activate it. 2 shots burned craters in my armor, though it held before I could catch the rest on my blade. I raised a hand and caught Bo in a telekinetic grip, then I pulled her towards me. She cursed and continued to futilely shoot at me for a moment, before her hands dropped to her belt and she pulled a pair of grenades with a blue stripe in the middle. I chuckled as she threw them at me. A dismissive gesture later, the grenades flew to the left, but that was enough to break my hold on her. The Mandalorian drew a vibrosword from behind her back and charged me. The old-fashioned way, eh? I grinned and met her with my saber. Our blades met and her sword didn't held its own. It was either skin or cortosis plated at the very least. Bo attacked with desperate ferocity, attempting to overwhelm me with a flurry of well-aimed powerful blows. I parried, deflected or dodged her attacks for a few seconds, then went on the offensive. It didn't take long to figure out that while she was rather good, Bo simply lacked the experience with a blade to last against me for more than a minute or two. It was going to take that long only because I didn't want to accidentally maim her. She apparently got to the same conclusion. Bo suddenly let her sword go, activated her built-in vibroblade and tackled me. Acting on instinct, I slammed my lightsaber in her chest as she surprised me. Her armor started glowing from the energy it was deflecting and absorbing but held as Bo slammed into me and raised a hand for a lethal strike. I let my saber fall and grabbed her wrist a moment before she slammed her blade in my helmet. Bo tried to slam her other hand in my head and laughed when I caught it too. She opened her fingers to reveal a live grenade. Insane woman, I laughed back and released an uncontrolled telekinetic wave to shove her and the explosive off me. Bo landed hard a few meters away and the grenade went off behind a low metal panel, which absorbed most of the blast wave. That didn't deter her. She was on her feet a heartbeat later and charged me again. Bo started firing with a wrist blaster and that damn flamethrower again. I drew deeply from the dark side, formed a shield from the force that absorbed the Mandalorian's attacks. I grinned under my helmet and my heart raced faster and faster. I hadn't had such fun in a long damn time. It was time to get close and personal. I called my lightsaber, activated it mid-flight and used it to carefully cut through Bo's wrist blaster. She jumped back as the blade ghosted over her hand and left her with one less weapon. Before she could steady her footing, I used the force to tear out her flamethrower and threw it away with enough strength to shatter it on the ceiling. Dashing forward, I was upon her a moment later. Bo intercepted my fist with her arm guard and retaliated with a jab at my throat. I just lowered my head, catching it with the lower part of my helmet, something that I immediately regretted as my head started ringing. She went on the offensive, bombarding me with short, strong punches and the occasional kick aimed at my knees. I went on the defensive for a few moments, taking the hits on my arm guards, or occasionally on my chest plate, before deflecting her next strike and tackling her with a force-assisted jump. We struck the ground hard, though it was worse for Bo, who had to absorb the impact of my armored bulk. We found ourselves helmet to helmet and she immediately headbutted me. I grunted and saw stars for an instant, before slamming a fist in her helmet, then I placed my vibro blade a centimeter above her visor. "Do you yield?" I asked. A blue flash engulfed us and we were stuck to each other by a blue, pulsing jelly-like substance. An adhesive grenade? I haven't seen those since coming here. I muttered, then I gently tapped her visor with the blade. My right hand was mostly free. "Draw," Bo chuckled and carefully nodded to where our chests were touching. I could feel her hand crushed between us. "You have another live grenade, don't you?" I chuckled. "Thermal detonator actually." I knew she was grinning under her helmet. "Well played." "Not really," Bo sighed. "You weren't trying to kill me." "And you did." I couldn't keep the amusement out of my voice. "Yes, I did." The adhesive gel started slowly fading around us. I used the force to tear it apart and carefully stood up. Bo deactivated the detonator and accepted the hand I offered her, helping her to her feet. She pocketed the explosive and removed her helmet, revealing a sweaty hair and a smiling face. "We need to do this again sometime," Bo chuckled. "Anytime you want." I smiled and removed my helmet, letting the smell of burning metal and spice hit my face. Her smile widened. "Come with me. We aren't done yet." She walked towards the closest door. "Is that so?" I followed. We fought with weapons and armor for a second time. "Now we'll do it one last time, the Ekani way," Bo purred. "Hand to hand, no weapons and armor?" I asked to make sure. "No force tricks. I'm not a full Ekani. I couldn't properly read you under all that metal, though I like what I saw." "So you can read emotions and feelings through combat?" "Not as well as my grandmother or mother could." She paused and looked over her shoulder, "But I can indeed." =RK=. Guest Suites. Royal Palace. Sundari. Mandalore. Without armor to slow her down, Bo was incredibly fast. Her toned body moved like quicksilver. For every hit I could land, she delivered 2 or 3. She danced around me, weaving in and out of range only to strike and fade away. The closest I came to ending the fight was when I almost grappled her a minute ago, though she slipped away thanks to a sheet of sweat covering our bodies and I got a nasty bruise for my efforts. It was awesome. I hadn't felt more alive in years. Bo laughed and dashed in for another strike, which I let slip through my guard so I could close the distance. Our bodies slammed into each other with I used my greater bulk to push her back into a nearby column. Bo nearly slipped away after she planted her elbow under my breastbone and drove my air out. I doubled over and used the position to slam my shoulder in her gut, before she was able to knee me in the face. She grabbed my neck in a hold and squeezed. I slammed a fist in her side, leaving her breathless and freeing myself. That didn't stop her from kicking me in the knee and sending me stumbling to the ground. While I was falling, my hand shot up and grabbed Bo, pulling her down with me. We fell in a tangled web of limbs and stood there breathless for a few moments. Bo squirmed over me, trying to stand up, but I had none of that and we ended up wrestling, where my greater strength gave me a bit of advantage, that was all but lost by how sweaty we were. Then we somehow ended with Bo straddling me and I was holding her fist just above my nose. I quite like this position. I smirked. I can feel that. Bo's voice was a throaty purr. She lowered her head and our lips met. Requiem for Mandalore. =RK=. Part 1. Conference Room. Royal Palace. Sundari. Mandalore. Did you follow my advice? I asked Obi-Wan. The Jedi muttered something I couldn't hear and shook his head. You do look a bit disheveled and flustered, I continued. And you look like you went around with a Wookiee. Kenobi nodded towards my face. That would have been easier. I grinned. Last night was worth every bruise and cracked rib. Too much information. Why? Didn't you play hide the lightsaber with Satine? Vale, you would test a saint's patience. Obi-Wan glared at me. If your Duchess is anything like her sister in bed, you have nothing to complain about. Vale. The Jedi hissed. Our banter was interrupted by Bo and Satine entering the room. My girlfriend wore her usual armor, though it was painted black and had the Kryze symbol painted on the chest instead of the Death Watch emblem. Next to her, Satine looked a bit out of place clad in a suit of light green armor. The Prime Minister walked a step behind the sisters. The trainers just landed and will be arriving in a few minutes, Armek stated. Good. Bo? I asked. Right here. My girlfriend patted a pouch on her belt. All the data I have on Death Watch and what you took from the assassins. Splendid. So Duchess, when are you going to make Obi-Wan here a proper Mandalorian? He's a stubborn Jedi, but I'll convince him sooner that latter. Corrupting Jedi, sister? Bo smiled. I knew you had it in you. Shush you. Hey. I'm right here. Obi-Wan protested. If you need pointers on how to make him beg to become a Mandalorian, just ask, Bo continued undeterred. I'll manage, thank you very much. Satine muttered in a dry voice. General Vale, have you decided how to sell your potential change in status to the Republic? The Duchess decided to leave Kenobi alone. A few. Mandalore's critical strategic location, the potential to bring a whole sector to our side, a promise that the Mandalorians won't be turning on the Republic among other things. We'll probably need some high-profile missions to prove our worth to the war effort. I think Mandalorian strike teams augmented by Jedi going after strategic targets to either softer up or outright take enemy-held planets. Further, trainers. The Republic is just beginning a huge expansion of the armed forces with non-clone personnel. That might work, if you survive the initial backslash. There's that. In the end, we'll need to keep Mandalore intact for at least 2 months. After that, holding this world would be easier. I smiled. How so? Bo asked. An old project of mine will be operational once again in 7 weeks. It must be something special if you believe it could help secure this planet. Obi-Wan added. Oh, it is. You'll all see it when the time comes. Any news about Vizsla's supporters? How many clan leaders are likely to vote for him? Bo asked the Prime Minister. Armek frowned. It's unclear. Before the Duchess' statement, he was the only viable candidate, but didn't have enough support to become Mandalore. However, Vizsla and his agents were busy. I know he met with half a dozen clan leaders yesterday alone, though if they will support him or not remains to be seen. We can count on Yomaget and most clans running weapon manufacturing business. Those I met with personally love what we can offer them. There are a lot of people who will jump at the chance to be the ones rearming Mandalore. Bo interjected. However, some of them won't care whose weapons they will be building. True. Yomaget's support will be important. He's practically the most powerful clan leader and one of the most influential. Satine added. Are you sure he'll really support you? Reasonably, considering what I offered him and his corporation. That surprise of yours? Armek asked. Among other things. The door rang as an armored fist knocked on it. Enter. Satine's clear voice ordered. The doors opened up and revealed a corridor full with armed and armored Mandalorian warriors. I recognized 3 of the 4 people crowding the entrance thanks to their armors, Kal Skirta, Magil Amar, and Walon Vor. General. I returned Skirta's salute.
I'm glad you could get here so fast.
Fortunately we still control hyperspace lanes allowing us rapid transit from Camino to home.
Guillemar added. Hopefully we'll be able to keep it that way. Please do go in.
50 Mandalorians and 8 Republic commandos made their way inside and gathered around the table. A brief round of introductions followed, allowing me to put names to the rest of Scarta's command group, Rav Brala, Vonti Turfo, and Court Davin. The first two were women in red armor and the latter a tall man in forest green.
We're here, General Vale. Make your pitch. Scarta went straight to the point. Do I have to outline the situation again? I asked.
Only anything relevant that happened since we headed this way,
Brala answered.
Well, the clan leaders will be gathering here in 5 days to choose Mandalore.
Needless to say,
Vizsla has been a busy little gangster. He or his agents had been meeting with clan leaders, trying to either plead to their honor, offer them deals or threaten their families.
You've got to be joking, Turvo exclaimed.
Sir. She added a moment later.
Wish I had.
Yesterday morning I went to talk with Colordo. A few hours before I got there, he had been visited by Death Watch members who threatened his daughter Mira if he didn't support Vizsla.
I don't think that would be an isolated accident. He won't win many votes that way.
Scarta frowned.
No. He won't be trying to threaten most clan leaders either. Last time I checked, there were just Cole and his kid.
Not many people left on Mandalore he could trust these days, Cal sighed.
What is Cole going to do?
He was planning to leave Mandalore. I gave him a personal frequency he can contact me on, to either help him disappear or provide protection for Mira if he decides to support me.
Support you? Who's your candidate for Mandalore? Rev asked.
That would be me,
I stated calmly.
The room suddenly grew quiet.
If I could convince these people, I would be that much closer to gaining the title.
There were at least 3 clan leaders among the Kivaldar in the room.
== Part 2.
Conference room.
Royal Palace.
Sundari. Mandalore. You want to be the next Mandalore?
Scarta asked. His expression was an interesting mixture of stunned disbelief and shock. The rest of the trainers weren't much better, though if their faces were anything to go by, they were suddenly doubting my sanity.
An outsider, who if rumors to be believed is detached from this agent has no idea what we need as a people.
The general continued. How this
questionable idea helps save our people from another civil war?
From where I stand it's likely to cause one.
Prevent a clash with the Death Watch?
That's inevitable.
That cancer has to be removed. Now, mitigating any engagements between Mandalorians.
That's doable. I think so at least.
I stared down Scarta.
That doesn't answer Gal's question. We didn't come back to support your power plays. Brala added.
That's one way to look at the situation.
I nodded.
It's all a matter of perspective. Aren't you supposed to be a Sith, not a Jedi?
A Mandalorian whose name I didn't catch interjected. Speak plainly, no word games. If that's your desire.
Frankly, if all I was going for was power, the best thing I could do to preserve my current station as one of the most powerful men in the galaxy would be to burn down Mandalore as some senators and generals would love me to. That's the only way to somewhat mitigate the hit on my power base and reputation this whole fiasco is going to cause, no matter its ultimate outcome.
I glared at the assembled warriors. That gave them some food for thought.
How exactly is that an incentive to help you become our leader?
Scarta asked. It sounds as a reason to consider you an enemy.
If Death Watch takes power or just starts a civil war, the Republic will have to intervene to prevent the Sis gaining Mandalore as an ally or at the very least using this system and the surrounding area as a staging ground. The ensuing battles will see our people divided and destroyed no matter which side wins, Brala stated.
That's why you called us here, isn't it?
True. An engagement over Mandalore is inevitable. The capital world is at important strategic location, one neither side can afford to leave in enemy hands. Do I have to explain what havoc a fleet of raiders stationed here could wreak on the nearby hyperlanes? I do remember the Great Blockade which almost strangled the Republic by cutting easy access to the Outer Rim.
Ultimately we don't have enough ships to have a decisive role in this, Scarta sighed.
We have millions of warriors on this world alone, with many more spread through the sector or busy being mercenaries and bounty hunters.
However, in the grand scheme of things that isn't a decisive number. Guillemar added. What do you have to gain by becoming Mandalore? Somehow I doubt you're trying to do it of the goodness of your heart. Of course not, though the primary reasons I want the job are actually sentimental ones, if you can believe it. The newcomers stared at me as if I grew another head. Fine. You're not a Jedi, that's for sure. But you aren't acting like a Sith. So who or what the crap are you? Davin asked. I snorted. Truly, my people's reputation has gone down the drain. What do you expect me to be? A raging imbecile who solves every problem through the most direct and brutal way imaginable? Someone too busy with his research and experiments to pay attention to the larger world? I shook my head. There are many kinds of Sith, something you people should know better than most. Or were at any rate. I shrugged. Fair enough. Scarta waved a hand. Enough off-topic discussion, Court. I want answers and a very good reason why we shouldn't leave right now. No one becomes Mandalore over sentimental reasons, especially not a Sith. True. If those were my only reasons, I simply wouldn't be able to justify trying to gain the title. For those who might be unaware or disbelieving, the rumors are true. I'm from the Old Republic era. I began my training as a Sith on Korriban shortly before the sack of Coruscant and the long not-so-cold war that followed. In my time I fought beside many Mandalorians, and some of my best friends were Stephen and Mako Ordo. For me, it was just a year ago that I was on this world, drinking tea with Mandalore the Dauntless and his wife. It's in the honor of the great friendship I had with them that I want to see their people, their culture prosper again. I paused. Most of the Kaivalda had looks of disbelief on their faces, while the rest kept their thoughts behind expressionless masks. Proof? Scarta asked. None that can convince you. I shrugged. How do I prove that I'm a Sith of old? My lips twitched into a grim smile. How do I prove that I am the Black Knight of folklore? Any proof you can give could be an elaborate fabrication, Bral sighed. Even your powers, we've read stories, seen ancient holovids, but all that means is that you could be someone rediscovered old techniques and powers. That's a reasonable conclusion, Griff. Even if I was a clone of Darth Vader, who someone got the original's memories, that would be easier to believe that I traveled thousands of years in the future. I shook my head. We'll get nowhere with this. I still want to hear why should we consider supporting you, Turvo stated. I gave the warrior a nod. With your help, I can make Mandalore and its people great again. I will do my best to reunite our scattered people, forging them into a single nation based on honor and the principles of the Mandalorian culture. This whole sector once either belonged to answered to the Mandalorians, and that's how it shall be once again. That's a tall order, though at least you have ambitious plans. Scarta must. What about the Death Watch? The majority of their members are nothing but honorless thugs who know nothing of being honorable warriors. We'll expose them for what they are and crush them as the criminal scum they are. That's something I can get behind. Bralla nodded. Still, you don't need to be Mandalore for that. I need to become Mandalore, because that's the only chance any of us has of bringing the Mandalorian people together behind a single banner. A civil war on top of the Republic and Sith slugging it in space and on the ground here would be disastrous. We'll fall divided, easy prey for either side, Scarta sighed. That is, isn't it? We need not only a Mandalore who can bind us together, but one that the Republic would find acceptable. Not quite. One that I find acceptable. I looked him in the eyes. I can't afford to leave the Mandalorian situation unresolved. While there may be someone I've overlooked, the only viable candidates right now are either Vishnu or people in his camp. None of them would do, and even if there was a viable alternative, they would need to convince me that they would be supporting the Republic in this war until the Confederacy is done for. How is that our problem? Devin asked. We're a potential threat, long-term I mean. Scarta answered. Right now we don't have a decent navy, no real army to speak of, though we have millions of experienced infantry. Our warriors have training and equipment rivaling or outright outmatching the GAR, though that means little without logistics, navy or armored forces. However, give us 2 years and that can change. We could have a decent fleet built in that time along with equipping ourselves for a war like this one. A few more years and neither side would be able to simply dictate us demands and treaty terms. We would be a major player on the galactic stage once again. We have the potential to become one right now, though we're divided and that holds us back. With what resources? Devin asked. Uniting this sector would be enough by itself, though that alone would take too much time. Using captured Sith industries and equipment, Republicade and my own resources, those can make an united Mandalore something no one in their right minds will griff with. However, all of that is a long-term concern. The war is likely to be decided one way or another in the next 2 years. If leveraged properly, the existing number of Mandalorian warriors might be enough to tip the scales in the Republic's favor. That's what I get short-term at the price of possibly losing my position as a general in the Republic Army and for sure getting my current powers significantly reduced. I'm banking that we'll be able to hold on long enough to make that sacrifice worth it. Now, this is something I can buy. Scarta nodded. Let's talk details. All you've really told us is your vision for the future, one I at least might be persuaded to accept. How exactly are you going to accomplish it? How are you going to unite our people behind yourself? Good questions. Interlude. The Confederacy Strikes Back. Council Chamber. Raxa Secundus. Confederacy of Independent Systems, Capital World. 3 of the most influential people within the council were gathered for this meeting. Shumai, the old Gossam, who had served as the Presidente of the Commerce Guild for years. Next to her stood San Hill, the Moon Chairman of the Intergalactic Banking Clan, an institution that suddenly found itself under censure after one of its leaders played an important part in the disastrous peace conference that saw Senator Amidala in a coma within undisclosed location and got a lot of the peace-inclined Confederacy Parliament members killed. Last but certainly not the least was Tresht Ilroth, the new Nemoidian Viceroy of the Trade Federation. Thanks to the way their hive mind worked, he was their undisputed leader. Further, his ascension to the position was a good thing for multiple reasons. Chief among them was that Gunry's death had caused the Trade Federation to stop working until a new leader could be chosen and assume the position. The other reason was actually more important. Thanks to the way the Nemoidian hive mind worked, Ilroth was aware of his predecessor's dealings with certain Sith and deeply disapproved. Now he actually was in a position to do something, mainly thanks to a fluke. The people who were supposed to be the next in line were not in position to seize power when Gunry got himself killed thanks to being too busy running various errands for him. That very thought made Tresht smile. Becoming a leader of his people and the Trade Federation thanks to his predecessor's hubris, now wasn't that some sweet irony? We're all here. Hill spoke quietly. You called us here, Viceroy. I hope it's important. The tall Moon's eyes bore into Tresht's own. The Nemoidian stared back. Dooku was right about one thing, you know. Ilroth must. The Republic Senate is under the control of a Sith who is behind this war. Our dear Count just forgot to mention that he's the Sith's apprentice and running our side of the war for that man. That little bombshell made the other leaders stare at him with disbelief. After all, those were few of the council members who actually weren't aware who they were really working for. Do you actually have any proof? Mai asked after a few moments of deafening silence. I actually have. Tresht smiled and pulled a small holometer from a pocket in his traditional viceroy pockets. My predecessor kept a record of few conversations with the Sith. Ilroth activated the device and the 3 of them watched a few conversations between Sidious and Gunry, the first dating as far back as the ill-thought and planned invasion of Naboo. The last was the Sith issuing orders shortly before Gunry got himself captured and killed in that botched rescue attempt at Rhodia. That puts the war in a new light. The madness that's been happening lately. Mai shook her head. I can confirm that the Sith assisted in the creation of the Confederacy. San Hill sighed. His colleagues stared at him at the admission. This is going to be good. Please elaborate. Tresht waved at the moon. The Sith have been in contact with the banking clans for decades. We had a mutually profitable arrangement, something we've come to review after what's been happening lately. You didn't expect a Sith to betray you eventually? Mai snorted. The mutual profit was great. The moon muttered sullenly. It makes no sense to nationalize our assets within the Republic. And this Sith of yours has the power to prevent it? The Gossam female needled him. He's the Criffing Chancellor Palpatine, of course he can, Hill snapped back. Palpatine. Mai repeated in a flat tone. Him. Yes. San grumbled. That's my conclusion too. Ilroth added helpfully. The Presidente groaned and slumped back in her chair. It should be obvious with the benefit of hindsight, no? This senseless destruction of late? The wanton slaughter without purpose aside terror tactics? It's something that a Sith of legend should be doing. Then there's this third one, Vale. He was unexpected. Hill interjected. As far as I knew, there were always only two ever since we were first contacted. It's the same for us. Though until Nabugunri believed that there was just one Sith. So there could be even more waiting an opportune moment to reveal themselves? Mai asked. Two sullen nods answered her. Dooku will be arriving here tomorrow. Ilroth added helpfully. He'll want to reaffirm his position as a leader of the council. Hill nodded. The Sith would bring us to run, and after their latest shenanigans there won't be peace unless we win or lose our heads. Mai sighed. I trust that none of you want to be tried by a Republic court for mass murder and anything else they decide to throw at us if we lose. There won't be a trial if a Sith-led Republic wins. Just a quiet execution. Tresk interjected. Some of us know too much and the others could prove to be thorns in Palpatine's side once he's won. Well, then we'll have to make sure that the Confederacy wins this war or we'll hang. Mai grimaced. That's easier said than done, Hill stated. True. However, the new leader of the Techno-Union will be arriving tonight. He might not be in the Sith's pockets, or even if he's bought we should try making him a better offer. Mai looked thoughtful. The four of us would have enough assets to make change, Tresk said. That might be enough to confront Dooku and survive. It's a deadly gamble you propose. Hill looked shifty for a moment. It's either that or we're all dead anyway. Do you really think that a Sith would reward us with anything but death once he has no more use for us? Mai sneered. It doesn't make any business sense. We could still be useful. You should have learned that by now, Hill. A Sith don't think like us normal beings, Ilroth sighed. The madness of the last half an year or so should be a proof enough. Arche equals. Techno-Union Suites. Rexa Secundus. I see. Cleo Vombra, the cyborg chosen as the new leader of the Techno-Union just a few days ago, rasped. He was a humanoid who had all his visible flesh replaced by cybernetics, making him look like a particularly advanced combat droid, which made it impossible to determine what species he used to be. Those who knew him before the extensive augmentations would see little if anything left from the tall Zabrak and the hulking figure made of durasteel. Vombra's artificial eyes scanned the three Confederacy leaders sitting in his guest suite, an almost sterile room which could be mistaken for a particularly high-tech workshop. The only thing giving a light to the distinction was the steel table in the center, surrounded by chairs that looked comfortable for those poor sods who were still mere flesh and bone instead of steel and cybernetics. That explains some of Tambor's shenanigans. The cyborg spoke in mechanical voice, which nevertheless could very well express his exasperation. From the Union's point of view, my predecessor's actions on Ryloth were a pointless waste of resources with nothing of real value to gain. And a lot to lose, he didn't add aloud. You're here for a reason, not to cry on my shoulder. Cleo's photoreceptors scanned the council members. We plan to move against Dooku tomorrow. If he's reaffirmed as our leader, the Confederacy will be done for, Ilroth stated. We too as its leaders, you mean? Vombra gave out a mechanical chuckle that echoed within the room. Did any one of you ask the relevant questions? Can we win the war? Tresk did so. We talked about it. Hill nodded. While the situation is less than ideal, we have some untapped advantages. The way we've all fought on the cheap so far? Cleo asked. Using low-quality droids and mere frigates as our main combatants? The mere idea was an anathema for the Union's foremans, yet they were somewhat content to pour more and more money into R&D, liquid assets made free by not needing to produce armies of top-of-the-line droids and fleets of better ships. That was going to change. Dooku at least had a few decent ideas. What could those people offer the Union? True. It was Mia who spoke this time. We've used only our security forces so far, granted we expanded them greatly, but that's it. We're well aware that when seeking to build them we were more interested by cheap good enough solution instead of what is best. Can you afford enough of the best? Cleo asked the most important question. The three beings looked at each other, then Hill nodded. The banking clans, Commerce Guild and Trade Federation can finance the war for the next 3 years if we start mass-producing our various high-quality military units as well as various experimental designs. Our estimates are that the war would be either won or lost by the time we're about to run out of money and the economy is threatened by collapse. Barring enemy action against our infrastructure? Vombra asked. The credits would still be available, but the economy could collapse sooner in that case. Tresk added.
So finally you're about to open your bank accounts for the war effort.
Cleo would have smiled if he still could.
In a matter of fact, Dooku already ordered such, a phased replacement of most of our current armies with better, more expensive models. The same for our navy, though it all would take some time and careful balancing.
We're ready to pay for a victory. The price of defeat would be unthinkable. Hill grunted, in grim acceptance. Then we might have a deal.
The Techno-Union would have some conditions in order to support you.
Let's talk business then.
Mia smiled. =RK=. Interlude, the Confederacy strikes back 2. Noon, the next day.
Council chamber.
Raxus Secundus. Confederacy of Independent Systems capital world. Count Dooku walked in, head held high. He knew that trouble awaited him within. The sense of unease he had all morning, combined with the heightened security he noticed after landing, were clear giveaways.
The councillors were restless.
The Sith had no doubt that they would demand explanations, perhaps even try to remove him from the position of nominal leader of the Confederacy, something that he simply couldn't allow.
The Count felt unease, even fear, before he entered the familiar council chambers,
which were much less so today. It took all his composure and years of experience as diplomat not to halt just past the threshold. The large room was much different than he remembered. The long table that dominated the center of the chamber was cut in half and the councillors were sitting at the far end, leaving a quite large open space between them and the door. There were 2 platoons of commando droids standing at attention along the walls, flanking him, all armed with vibroblades. Further, Dooku could clearly see a hastily installed shield generators at the far end of the chamber, generators that activated with a quiet hum and separated the councillors from him with a thick wall of energy. Another platoon armed with distinct sonic screamers were behind the shield, ready to step between him and the table. What is the meaning of this? Dooku snapped, not bothering to hide his anger. After all, pulling such a stunt on anyone would infuriate them, much less someone of his stature.
It should be obvious, my lord.
Ilroth Tresk, the new viceroy of the Trade Federation, stood up. Everyone in here knows what you are. Some of our predecessors had profitable relationship with the Sith.
That's in the past.
Viceroy, be careful what you accuse me of. Dooku spoke quietly, adding a suggestion through the Force. Tresk shook his head.
I am not as weak-willed as Gunray.
The Nemoidian snapped. Using your powers to influence us? A flat mechanical voice hissed. That gave Dooku pause. He had left his previous meeting with Foreman Cleo with the impression that the new Techno-Union leader was on board with the Sith plans. The Count narrowed his eyes at the gathered councilmen. Hill, Mia, the Nemoidian. Those had the strongest feeling of defiance around them. A few of the rest too, but within them the fear was stronger. If he could handle the ringleaders properly, the rest would fall in line. Dooku knew that from years of working with them. However, 2 of the group were new. He had precious little first-hand experience with them. In fact, they shouldn't have been the new leaders of their respective factions. However, the chaos and unrest caused by the war conspired to push them forward instead of more manageable candidates. Dooku was determined to ensure that their replacements were going to be more tractable. I'm unsure what you mean, Foreman Cleo. The nobleman answered calmly. He was more interested in the defenses set up around the room than in what the group of dissidents had to say. Given all you've done for the Confederacy, some council members insisted to give you an opportunity to explain yourself. Suimiya spoke in a composed tone that didn't betray any of the anxiety she radiated. What about everything he and his master did to the Confederacy? Ilroth snipped. That we already discussed. The Gossam woman shrugged. This seems to be an inquisition. Dooku frowned at the councillors. What am I being accused of? Being a Sith, engineering this war for your own profit and mishandling it to the deterrent of the Confederacy. Ilroth spoke with newfound confidence. There was just one Sith a decade ago, the one my predecessor unwisely made a deal. The one who promised him that the Senate would be handled. Then there were 2, an apprentice who died on Naboo. There appears to be 2 Sith these days. One master and one apprentice. So the council believed when I was a Jedi? Dooku shrugged, reminding them of the role he played, that of an enemy of the Sith who was just doing what he believed best. Even if that meant starting a civil war that was ravaging the galaxy. It was surprising how many beings bought the charade as truth. There were at least few on this very council too. Really? I thought that there were 3. Wasn't it curious that this new Sith, Veil, appeared just as we were winning the war? Just to reverse our fortunes too, especially when some of our members could confirm that our confederacy was supposedly backed by the Sith?
Hill glared. Dooku raised an eyebrow at that. The banker was afraid, all right, anxious too, but there was a feeling of rising anger and, more importantly, betrayal. It took the Count a few seconds to mentally review the more important events that might cause that, and he had to suppress a wince. After the events on Neimodia, Sidious had moved to consolidate his control over the banking clan's assets within the Republic. That appeared to be a mistake now. You all know that the Republic is under the control of a Sith, who is our real enemy. True. From certain point of view. Cleo's mechanical voice interrupted Dooku, irritating the Sith. The apprentice would turn on the master eventually. Wasn't that a part of your code? It's a part of the Sith code. I am no Sith. Perhaps not. Shumia nodded, taking everyone aback. We aren't concerned if you're a Sith or not. Only if you work against the Confederation and there is some proof about that. Then ask and I'll explain. Dooku nodded, fighting to keep a lid on his temper. We will. Why did the Sith engineered the bioweapon attacks on Naboo and Coruscant? Ilroth glared. Fellow council members, the investigation is still ongoing, Dooku sighed. Unfortunately, Severance hadn't been able to provide his anything solid on the perpetrators. Besides confirming what he already knew, there was some kind of conspiracy withing the Confederacy with their own names. I can assure you that I have nothing to do with those attacks. Dooku was a picture of innocence as he said that. It was even the truth. He wasn't an idiot to escalate the war to such an extent at this time. Doing so didn't serve his plans. I can't speak about any hypothetical Sith within the Confederacy, much less about the one controlling the Republic. This charade is tiresome. Cleo gave a mechanical sigh. We all know that you are a Sith. More than half of the Council had dealings with you or your master while you operated as such. That was true. However, Dooku wasn't going to admit it for any conveniently placed camera so he could incriminate himself. It was clear that the meeting was a setup, however his agents letting him walk in without a warning. He would have long conversations about the price of failure with them. It's a charade. All right, Dooku snapped. I'm being put on a trial on made-up charges. Or are we going to pretend that this isn't a trial? A trial? Not really. We aren't judges. Mia smiled. Trying you for anything? That isn't in our power. However, removing you from your position within the Confederacy? That we could and did do. You're no longer our leader, Count Dooku. Ilroth added. Can't say I regret not being a part of a council obviously chock full with backstabbers. The Sith shrugged. It was getting harder and harder to keep a lid on his anger. The Confederacy was his. He made it possible, he built it into what it was today. It was a tool for the Sith, one that would exist or die by their will. Still, you said I would be able to explain? Dooku asked. He believed that the meeting was filmed and decided to play for the cameras, showing himself as the betrayed leader. And you lied to our faces. Mia's glared at him. The bioweapon attacks? Your pet, grievous excesses? Do you think all of us for blind fools, Count? That's not what the Confederacy stands for. That's not what we fight for. The Gossam stood up and pointed an accusing finger at him. Some of Gunry's and Tambor's actions made no sense from either business or military perspective. However, acting under the influence of a Sith, who proves all the tales about their kind as true. The old woman shook her head in disgust. You engineered this war, you and your master, and now the whole galaxy is paying the price for your games. Her words rang with conviction. Dooku could almost respect her for knowing him to be a Sith and be ready to stand up to him despite that. That wasn't going to make her death any less certain. That's a very grave accusation, Councilwoman Mia. Dooku shook his head with regret. Not as great as your crimes. You're under arrest, Count Dooku, to be handled to the Jedi so you can answer for your war crimes. Tresk pointed at his chest. Dooku glared back. Do you expect me to come quietly so your cronies could arrange an accident before I could be handled back to my old colleagues? The Count sneered. He didn't believe for a moment that he would live if he went quietly. And even if he did, he didn't like his chances for escaping again. Do you really believe you can fight your way out of here? Cleo asked with what sounded like professional interest. I think we're about to find out. Dooku muttered.
He concentrated and extended his will through the force, using it to activate a certain communicator he always carried with himself. Ghostly fingers entered a long passcode within a moment, then pressed the activation button. A long string of binary was emitted, the shutdown code built into the droid armies of the Confederacy. That was one of the contingencies his Masha and Dooku himself had prepared while planning the war. So it was to the Count's great surprise that only a handful of droids shut down. I was wondering if you would have a way to shut down our armies if everything I was told was true.
Cleo must. It appears to be so. Thank you for providing us with the code. Get him.
The foreman ordered the commandos. All but the shutdown machines were from his personal guard, built by his own specifications and having quite a different programming than the rank and file. In fact, almost all of the droids protecting this section of the city were made of personal troops provided by either him or his 3 co-conspirators, and as such were built and programmed differently than the frontline troops.